Thank you. Hi, I'm Darren Sharp. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. It's great to be here with you all. Thank you so much, Trevor, for the invitation. Today I wanted to talk about the emergence of platform cooperativism in Australia and look at the emerging ecosystem. I wanted to start by just pointing to the image on the left here, just by noticing how the decisions we make today leave an inheritance for future generations. You can see that on the left there is a monument which celebrates workers in Melbourne who in 1856 fought for and actually won an 8-hour day. And this legacy you can see in the other image on the right there in Melbourne's famous laneways. There we go. People are eating, drinking, socialising, having a good time, and that's the legacy of people going back 150 years working and fighting hard for an 8-hour day. In terms of my background, I'm the director of Social Surplus, a strategy consultancy I founded in 2010. I work with a lot of local governments and public sector organisations in Australia and also starting to in New Zealand as well. I'm also the Aussie editor of Shareable and the Melbourne coordinator of the Sharing Cities Network. And I'm doing my PhD through the CRC for Low Carbon Living on an urban living lab in Melbourne. I'm really interested in the future of our cities, the future of work, and people's ability to sustain good livelihoods, and how platform cooperativism can be harnessed to create an ethical bridge to the new economy, to keep wealth and decision-making in the hands of local communities, and to really address the rising inequality that we're seeing around the world. I wanted just to briefly touch on some Australian history and some context, because it might be unfamiliar to a lot of you in the room. I think it's important to point out that Australia, in terms of our first Australians, has the longest continuous human civilization on Earth, which deserves due recognition and credit. Over 50,000 years of continuous civilization in Australia, which is quite remarkable and something to be admired. And I think there's a history there of cooperativism that we don't necessarily recognise. I think we deserve to, and we should. The other thing to consider is that we're, in terms of our more recent past, we're a colonial settler economy, and we've talked about ourselves in terms of being the lucky country. That's not necessarily a term of endearment. I think we have natural advantages in terms of our natural resources, which we've been relying on for a number of years, and that's changing very quickly in terms of our post mining boom period of transition, which I'll talk about briefly in the next slide. We also have a really strong egalitarian tradition, which is worth pointing out, and a strong labour movement. Aussies seem to have a fairly innate sense of fairness, what we call the fair go, and we have a strong mutualist and cooperative tradition dating back to before World War II. But of course, inequality is rising along with the gap between rich and poor. Australia, like most other economies in the world, is in a period of rapid transition. So we're seeing a declining agricultural, mining and manufacturing base. Ford, Holden and Toyota are all closing down or have closed down their operations in Australia after about a nearly 90-year period of automotive production in my country. There's massive housing affordability issues in the bigger cities like Sydney and Melbourne. Intergenerational wealth gap between the boomers and Gen X and Y, the millennials as well. The climate crisis, we feel it really keenly in Australia. Real wages are in decline. And of course, the rise of precarious independent contractors and casual labour. So the social, economic and environmental challenges that Australia are facing is global in nature, and it's shared in solidarity with other far less prosperous countries. And I would argue that Australia can and should leverage platform cooperativism to create pathways to shared prosperity and mutual benefit. In terms of a snapshot of the Australian cooperativism mutual sector, this is some recent research that came out from the Centre for Entrepreneurial Management and Innovation, which has been supported by the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals. We can see that there are at least 1,983 active cooperative and mutual enterprises in Australia, combined gross annual turnover in excess of 130 billion, combined gross assets under management of over 650 billion, and in terms of active memberships, over 29 million members. So this is significant, and we want to grow this sector. In terms of the Australian cooperatives ecosystem, there's a number of peak bodies, a number of social enterprises, networks and advocacy groups which provide support to the local co-ops and mutual sector. And in the past year or so, it started to expand to support for emerging platform cooperatives. So there's a group there that I'm involved in, the Commons Transition Coalition, which I'll talk about briefly. Also BCCM, Social Enterprise Services, Co-op Workshop, Employee Ownership Australia, New Zealand, Mercury, Get Mutual as well. And in terms of the Commons Transition Coalition, this is a group that I co-founded last year to coincide with a visit to Melbourne by Michelle Bowens of the Peer-to-Peer Foundation. And it's to support social entrepreneurs, organisations and community groups working on commons-based initiatives which foster social justice, foster economic democracy and environmental sustainability. This year we convened a couple of platform co-op events with Nathan Schneider and also Michelle Bowens in Melbourne. And we also published a City as Commons policy reader edited by Dr. Jose Ramos, good friend and colleague. And this includes contributions from over 30 contributors from around the world. So I highly recommend everyone have a look at the City as Commons policy reader. In terms of the events that we've run this year, this was one with Nathan, seems like only yesterday, Nathan, at a beautiful church in Melbourne. We had over 70 people. Nathan delivered a fantastic keynote. We had a panel of local exemplars. The event itself was called Sharing Value and Ownership for the Common Good, Building the Commons Economy. We then had a design lab that was facilitated by Jose Ramos with a social enterprise called AbilityMate, which I'll talk a bit about soon. And there's a write-up of the event, which you can see there on the Peer-to-Peer Foundation. There's a short and bit.ly link there for you to follow up later on. There was another related event in June in Melbourne that our friends and colleagues, including Social Enterprise Services, put on. This is more of a public lecture at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image in Melbourne at Federation Square, and that was with Nathan and also Janelle Orsi. That got quite a bit of media coverage as well. Nathan was doing media interviews on ABC Radio and elsewhere. So we really put platform cooperativism on the map and in the public agenda in Australia this year through these various events and activities. I want to spend the next few minutes looking at some emerging social enterprises and organisations and community groups which are looking at transitioning to or becoming platform cooperatives. And the first of these is AbilityMate, which is a social enterprise based in Sydney. And they actually they're a wonderful organisation. They are using open design and 3D printing to develop assistive devices for people with disabilities. They're currently a private company. They've got a constitution which binds them to their social mission, but their founders are actively investigating how to become a platform co-op, as they see it as the only way to stop extracting value from peer partners and to protect the assistive devices they want to develop so they can distribute their return on investment for the common good of their members. And they're currently receiving advice from Inspiral, and they're exploring options for capped return on investment. That's AbilityMate. They're based in Sydney. bHive is they actually want to become Australia's first platform cooperative. They're an initiative developed by Ian McBurney, based in a regional centre called Bendigo, which is a couple of hours north of Melbourne in the state of Victoria. It's a regional city of 100,000 people. And so far it's been spared the arrival of Uber. So there's a real opportunity here. They want to actually develop a sharing economy platform, which is owned by and governed by the community members themselves, and take on a platform cooperative model. So it'll be basically supporting car sharing, bike sharing, stuff sharing, peer-to-peer energy, skill sharing, time banking, peer-to-peer lending, a whole range of activities. And what they're hoping to do is that generate enterprises that can lead to income and profits that will be reinvested back into the local economy. So they're using the platform cooperative model as a way to support local economic development and to support their community. AnyShare is interesting. They are a US domiciled sharing economy platform, but their co-founder Eric Dorrian is based in Australia, and they're the world's first internet company to become a fair shares multi-stakeholder cooperative. So this model allows them to have investment and access to capital while retaining labour and customer shareholder classes. So AnyShare is a really interesting one to watch. Geddup is a community action platform. It helps organisations get things done. It's a scalable platform used by a range of local community groups, including schools and sporting clubs, and by also large organisations, including unions and conservation groups. They're also in the process of building integration with other platforms like Nation Builder. So their founder is actually looking at how to convert Geddup into a platform co-op where community members can control their personal data, where they can choose when and what data they share with their relationships. And the guiding principle being that, I want to own the technology that I use as my digital agent. So that's Geddup. Open Food Network is a non-profit social enterprise founded in Melbourne a few years ago, and they're building free software for better food systems. Basically, it's not a cooperative, but their software and their model is all about empowering local food producers to connect directly with their local communities and reduce the transaction costs of decentralised food distribution. YLab is a social enterprise for young people. We've got Dakshi here from YLab if you want to have a chat to her later on. They're creating a global network of young leaders to deploy on solving complex challenges and create systems change. It's a youth-led consulting and training practice with over 70 associates in Sydney and Melbourne. They run a 12-month graduate program for the new economy, and they're exploring how their associates could form platform co-ops and have ambitious plans to scale globally, leveraging the Global Youth Foundation's network. So that's YLab. Enkel is another cooperative. It's a Perth-based startup. They're in their business model finding phase. They've got a large community of 55 members, and their content at the moment is skill sharing and learning. In terms of the future, Australia has a real opportunity to drive platform cooperativism in the Asia-Pacific region and bring democratic ownership and governance to a number of these sectors that I'm pointing out here, including social enterprise. The social enterprise sector is growing in Australia, but it's still fairly dominated by the VC sort of models of ownership and governance. In terms of responsible sharing startups and sharing cities, we see that a lot of their platforms where there's provisioning of ride sharing and accommodation services and others, and as we move into the energy space, these sharing platforms are becoming more like utilities. There's obviously a massive opportunity with a sharing cities hat on to look at how we can have more platform cooperatives in the sharing cities space. In Australia, ag tech is an emerging area where there's some investment going into, but they're not really thinking about platform co-ops yet. I hope to change that over time, especially in terms of food distribution. I think there's a massive opportunity there. FinTech, what happens when we match things like community banking with blockchain potentially. P2P energy is starting to become a big issue globally. We're seeing things like community solar, exchanging surplus energy generated from solar PVC. I think there's an opportunity there for communities to look at platform cooperatives as a model to deal with P2P energy. And in terms of regional entrepreneurship and innovation, I think that we have to look at how our towns and regional centres can benefit from having their own local sharing platforms and other platforms which are leveraging a cooperative model to support good livelihoods in their local communities and local economic development and job creation. Just a bit of acknowledgement that over this coming year, in terms of moving into 2017, the Commons Transition Coalition and the Australian Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals are hoping to convene a platform co-op symposium in Australia, probably middle of 2017. And I look forward to helping the movement grow from strength to strength. I've lost my slides, but here we go. If you want to get in contact with me, there are my details, and thank you so much for your time.